Hello there. You've made it through another long day. Perhaps you're feeling tired. Perhaps your mind is still caught up in everything that happened today. Or maybe you've simply come here to escape the noise of the world for a little while. If that's the case, make yourself comfortable. Let your shoulders relax. Take a slow, deep breath. And as you exhale, allow the weight of the day to melt quietly into the stillness of the night. Because tonight, I'd like to tell you a story. And perhaps, before it reaches its end, you'll already be fast asleep, resting peacefully. So, if you're ready, let's begin. The city was one of those rare old places that knew how to grow quiet after sunset. Throughout the day, its sidewalks echoed with hurried footsteps as people rushed from one destination to the next. But as the sun slowly slipped below the horizon, those sounds gradually faded away, leaving the streets wrapped in a comforting silence. The narrow lanes winding between weathered stone buildings somehow seemed wider at night, as though the city itself could finally breathe once everyone had returned home. It was one of the first cool evenings of autumn. The sky had not yet surrendered completely to darkness. Warm amber light filtered through scattered clouds, lingering for a few fleeting moments on the windows of old apartment buildings before quietly giving way to the soft golden glow of the streetlights. On the corner of one of the city's oldest streets stood a small cafe. There was nothing remarkable about it at first glance. It wasn't fashionable, nor did it try to attract attention. Yet there was something quietly inviting about the place, something that rewarded anyone who chose to step inside. A small brass bell hung above the wooden entrance, greeting every visitor with the same gentle chime it had offered for decades. 2 flower pots rested beside the door, lovingly cared for through every season, a silent reflection of the owner who refused to let them wither. Inside, the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee filled the room. But coffee wasn't the only scent that lingered there. The fragrance of aged walnut tables, worn wooden bookshelves, old paperbacks, and countless quiet evenings blended together into something impossible to describe. Walking into the cafe never felt like entering a business. It felt like stepping into a little corner of the world where time had quietly agreed to slow down. The old clock hanging on the wall clicked softly as its hands reached 5 minutes before 7. One of the waiters instinctively turned toward the entrance. He didn't need to. He already knew what would happen next. A few seconds later, the brass bell above the door rang with its familiar, gentle chime. The old man walked in. No one knew exactly how old he was. 70? 80? Perhaps even older. It was impossible to tell. His hair was completely white, yet there was nothing frail about the way he moved. His steps weren't slow because of age. They were slow because they had followed the same path for so many years that they no longer needed to hurry. His charcoal gray overcoat was buttoned neatly to the top. The evening wasn't particularly cold, yet hardly anyone had ever seen him wearing anything else. In his right hand, he carried an old leather briefcase. Its corners were worn smooth with age, and the leather handle had begun to crack. Still, like the polished shoes he wore every evening, it was meticulously clean. Noah smiled the moment he saw him. "Good evening, sir." The old man returned the smile with the same quiet warmth he always carried. "Good evening." Nothing more was said. He walked toward his table. The small table for two, near the center of the cafe. His table. He pulled out the chair without making a sound and sat down. He never took off his coat. He simply placed his hat gently across his knees before lifting his eyes to the empty chair opposite him. He looked at it as though someone might arrive at any moment and take the seat across from him. Noah didn't bother asking for his order. There was no need. After all these years, some routines no longer needed words. About 10 minutes later, Noah returned with the usual order: a small white cup of black coffee, a slender glass of water, and a cinnamon biscuit resting neatly on a small porcelain plate. Nothing more, nothing less. It had been the same for as long as anyone could remember. The old man didn't reach for the coffee right away. Instead, he wrapped both hands around the warm cup, letting the gentle heat settle into his palms before quietly turning his gaze toward the window. Outside, the evening carried on without noticing him. People hurried along the sidewalks, some speaking into their phones, others rushing home after work, while a few quickened their pace, hoping to catch the last bus before the rain began. He watched them all, not with curiosity, not with envy. There was only the quiet calm of someone who had said goodbye to the world's endless rush many years ago. From behind the counter, Noah watched him. He had been working at the cafe for only 3 months, yet during that time he had never seen the old man miss a single evening. Every day, the same hour, the same table, the same cup of coffee, the same silence. And always the empty chair across from him. Before taking his first sip, the old man slipped a small pocket watch from the inside pocket of his coat. It was silver, though time had dulled its shine. The delicate engravings on its cover had faded over the years, and the chain had long since lost its polish. Even so, the care with which he held it made it clear that it remained one of his most treasured possessions. With a soft click, the cover opened. The tiny hands moved almost perfectly in rhythm with the gentle ticking of the old clock hanging on the cafe wall. For several silent seconds, he simply looked at the watch. Then he closed it again. Noah had noticed something peculiar. The old man never adjusted the time. He never wound the watch. It was almost as if he didn't take it out to check the hour at all. He simply wanted to look at it. At first, Noah assumed it was an old family heirloom. Later, he wondered if it had been a retirement gift from a career long since finished. But as the weeks passed, he began noticing other small rituals. The old man never drank his coffee immediately. He always watched the steam rising from the cup first, as though measuring its warmth with his eyes alone. Only then would he pick up the cinnamon biscuit and gently break it in half. He ate one small piece. The other remained untouched on the edge of the plate. And the empty chair across from him, it was never used. He never placed his briefcase there, never his hat, never a newspaper. The chair remained empty every single evening. One night, one of the cafe's regular customers laughed and nodded toward the vacant seat. "Waiting for someone?" The old man smiled politely. "It's always been reserved." That was all he said. No explanation followed. The answer stayed with Noah for days. Always? How could a table remain reserved for years? Why did he insist on sitting at a table for two when several smaller tables were always available? The questions kept growing. The answers never came. Daniel had owned the cafe for more than 30 years. One evening, while he was balancing the register after closing, Noah finally gave in to his curiosity. "Can I ask you something?" "About the old gentleman?" Without looking up, Daniel smiled. "I was wondering how long it would take before you asked." Noah shrugged with an embarrassed grin. "I can't help being curious." Daniel closed the cash drawer and walked over to the table by the front window. Outside, a light rain had begun to fall. Beneath the streetlights, each raindrop seemed to drift gently through the night instead of rushing toward the ground. "When I took over this cafe from my father," Daniel said quietly, "that man was already sitting at the same table." Noah looked up in surprise. Was he already old back then? A soft chuckle escaped Daniel. No, he was only middle-aged. Noah stared at him for a moment. "So, how long has he been coming here?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, his eyes wandering toward the old wooden beams crossing the ceiling, as if the answer had been hidden there all these years. 30 years, he paused for a moment. Maybe even longer. Without realizing it, Noah glanced toward the old man. He was still sitting by the window, quietly watching the rain. His coffee had barely been touched. Daniel spoke again, almost as though he were thinking out loud. "People can let go of almost anything. They quit smoking. They stop drinking coffee. They move to another city. They fall in love. They fall out of love. But some people, they never let go of a promise." Noah turned back toward him. "What do you mean?" Daniel smiled faintly. "I honestly don't know. I've never asked him." He fell silent before adding in a softer voice, "Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is respect another person's silence." Noah didn't reply. The cafe returned to its familiar stillness. The quiet hiss of the espresso machine blended with the steady ticking of the old clock on the wall. The old man seemed completely unaware of either. His eyes remained fixed on the empty chair across the table, as though it still belonged to someone who had simply stepped away for a moment. The following evening, the city prepared itself for another quiet night. This time, the sky was hidden beneath a blanket of heavy clouds. It wasn't raining yet, but the cool, earthy scent that always arrived just before the first drops filled the air. People passing the cafe pulled their coats a little tighter and quickened their pace. The streetlights flickered on at their usual hour. An elderly woman across the street carried the flowers from her balcony inside. The newspaper vendor lowered his metal shutter halfway. Like every evening, the city quietly performed its familiar rituals. Inside the cafe, however, time seemed to move a little differently. Steam drifted lazily from the espresso machine, curling toward the ceiling like a thin veil of mist. Rows of porcelain cups resting on old wooden shelves glowed softly beneath the warm lights. Behind the counter, Daniel sorted through a stack of worn account books while Noah wiped down the tables one by one. Every few moments, his eyes wandered toward the entrance. He no longer needed to check the clock. Somehow, he could simply feel when it was almost time. It had become strangely comforting. The old man no longer felt like just another customer. He seemed as much a part of the cafe as the brass bell above the door or the old clock on the wall. Right on cue, the little brass bell chimed once again. The old man stepped inside. Neither early nor late, exactly on time. Without looking up from the counter, Daniel smiled. "Good evening." "Good evening." The old man's voice was as calm as ever. There was something about the way he spoke that made everyone around him instinctively lower their own voices. He walked to his table. He left his overcoat buttoned. His hat rested gently across his knees. His briefcase was placed beside his chair, and the chair across from him remained empty once again. As Noah prepared the coffee, he found himself watching the old man more carefully than ever before. The old man had opened his briefcase. From inside, he carefully removed a small notebook bound in worn black leather. It was no larger than the palm of his hand. The edges had softened with age, and its pages had taken on the pale yellow tint that only time could create. He opened it, reached into his coat pocket for a fountain pen, paused for a few thoughtful seconds, then wrote a single line, nothing more. Noah couldn't make out the words from where he stood. The handwriting was far too small. A moment later, the notebook was closed again. The pen disappeared back into his pocket. That was all. No long journal entries, no letters, just one sentence. Every evening. One single sentence. Noah's curiosity was becoming impossible to ignore. Business was quiet that night. By 8 o'clock, only a few customers remained in the cafe. The old man continued sipping his coffee at the same unhurried pace as always. Daniel had disappeared into the kitchen. As Noah collected the empty cups from nearby tables, the old man quietly stood and walked toward the restroom. For the first time since Noah had started working there, the table was left unattended. Only for a few seconds. He froze. Two voices immediately began arguing inside his mind. One whispered, "Don't. That life doesn't belong to you." The other answered just as quietly, "Only a quick look. You don't have to open it. Just read the cover." His heartbeat quickened. The old man had already disappeared around the corner of the hallway. Before he realized what he was doing, Noah took a step forward, then another, until he found himself standing beside the table. The notebook lay exactly where Arthur had left it, closed. Its weathered leather carried the marks of countless years. Mere one corner, faded gold letters were barely visible beneath the worn surface. Noah leaned closer. He didn't touch it. He only tried to read what remained of the title. Just then, a calm voice spoke behind him. "Curiosity is one of humanity's oldest habits." Noah flinched and turned around. The old man was standing only a few feet away. He was smiling. There was no anger in his face, no disappointment. If anything, it looked as though he had expected this moment all along. Embarrassed, Noah immediately stepped back. "I'm so sorry, sir. The old man gave a gentle smile. "Sometimes the questions you can't answer are more beautiful than the answers themselves." He returned to his chair, picked up the little black notebook, and slipped it back into his briefcase. Noah lowered his eyes, too ashamed to say another word. Yet one final sentence stayed with him for the rest of the night. Some answers are meant to be read only when their time has come. That evening, after the cafe had closed, Daniel moved quietly through the room, switching off the lights one by one. Noah remained standing near the old man's table, unable to take his eyes off the empty chair across from it. Daniel noticed. "What happened tonight?" he asked softly. Noah told him everything. How he had almost looked inside the notebook. How the old man had caught him. How, instead of becoming angry, he had simply smiled. Daniel listened without interrupting. When Noah finished, he rested a hand on the table and remained silent for several moments. Finally, he spoke. "Tomorrow, I'll show you something." Noah looked at him in surprise. "What is it?" Daniel's eyes drifted toward the empty chair. "I'll show you why this table has never been moved." The following morning arrived with an unexpected brightness. The strong winds that had blown throughout the night had swept the clouds away, leaving behind the clearest sky the city had seen in months. Golden sunlight filtered between the old stone buildings, spilling across the cafe windows with a warm glow. There were no customers yet. The cafe had only just opened. As he did every morning, Daniel watered the 2 flower pots beside the entrance before carefully polishing the brass door handle with a soft cloth. It was a ritual he had never abandoned. Inside, Noah was placing the chairs back around the tables. The silence was broken only by the distant metallic rumble of a passing streetcar. As Daniel stepped inside, he reached into his pocket and pulled out an old key. Without saying a word, he walked toward the small storage room at the back of the cafe. "Come with me." Noah followed. The storage room looked even older than the cafe itself. The stone walls carried decades of damp stains, while dusty shelves were crowded with retired coffee machines, forgotten porcelain cups, and cardboard boxes that hadn't been opened in years. Daniel reached up to the highest shelf and carefully lifted down a small metal box. A thin brass plaque was fastened to its lid. Only one thing had been engraved on it: 1987. Noah stepped closer. Daniel slowly opened the box. Inside were dozens of old photographs. Some had curled with age. Others had faded so much that their colors had nearly disappeared. Daniel handed Noah the first photograph. It showed the same cafe, but it wasn't quite the one they knew today. The walls had been painted a different color. Curtains framed the windows. The tables were smaller. Then Noah noticed something that made him pause: the little table for two. It was standing exactly where it stood today. "The same table?" Daniel nodded. "Yes." "It hasn't moved?" "No, not once. Not when my father owned this place, not after I took over, and I doubt the next owner will move it either." Noah looked at him, puzzled. "Why?" Daniel gently took the photograph back. He held it in silence for a long moment before answering. "Because some people don't return to a table. They return to a memory." Noah said nothing. Instead, he reached for another photograph. Then another. A young couple laughing over coffee. A birthday celebration. Children wearing paper hats at Christmas. Friends raising glasses in celebration. Small moments of ordinary lives preserved forever on fading paper. Then he stopped. One photograph stole his breath. Standing near the right edge of the picture was the old man, except he wasn't old. He looked no older than 30. His hair was jet black. He wore a light-colored jacket, and his face carried the widest smile Noah had ever seen. Across the table sat a young woman. Her long, dark hair rested gently over her shoulders. She was reaching across the table, her fingertips almost touching his hand. Both of them were laughing, not politely, not quietly. They were laughing with the effortless joy of two people who believed life would always remain that simple. Without realizing it, Noah smiled too. For the first time, he wasn't looking at the quiet old man who came to the cafe every evening. He was looking at the young man he used to be. He turned the photograph over. On the back, written in faded fountain pen ink, was a single sentence: "Every evening at the same time." Nothing more. The rest had disappeared beneath the passing years. The ink had faded beyond recognition. Noah frowned. "Is that all?" Daniel took the photograph from his hands. His thumb slowly traced the missing words. It wasn't always. There used to be more. I can barely remember it now. Noah looked back at the smiling young woman. Who is she? For the first time that morning, Daniel didn't answer immediately. He carefully returned every photograph to the box and closed the lid. As he walked toward the door, he spoke without turning around. Her name belongs only to him. The rest of the day, Noah couldn't stop thinking about that photograph. For the first time, he understood that the quiet old man who sat alone every evening hadn't always lived in silence. Once, he had laughed. He had dreamed. He had loved. And somewhere between that photograph and the man who now stared at an empty chair every evening, life had changed everything. Evening came once again. At exactly 5 minutes before 7, the little brass bell above the door chimed softly. The old man stepped inside, just as he always did. But this time, Noah felt as though he were seeing him for the very first time. And in that moment, he noticed something that had somehow escaped him for weeks. The first place the old man looked wasn't the table. It was the old clock hanging beside the entrance. He stood there for a few quiet seconds, his eyes fixed on the hands of the clock. Only then did he walk toward his table. Noah quietly stored the detail away. Every evening, first the clock, then the table. Why? Later that night, as he locked the cafe for the evening, he found himself whispering beneath his breath, "He's not waiting for someone." His eyes drifted toward the empty chair. He's waiting for a moment in time. Throughout the rest of the week, the sun barely appeared. Heavy clouds settled over the city like a thick blanket, and each evening a gentle rain washed across the streets. Raindrops slid down the cafe's large windows, turning the world outside into a blurred watercolor painting. The old man seemed to welcome the rain. Noah noticed it for the first time. On ordinary evenings, Arthur only glanced outside from time to time. But whenever the rain began, he would quietly lift his coffee cup and sit watching the drops race down the glass without saying a word. The lines on his face softened. His eyes drifted somewhere far beyond the street outside. It was almost as though the rain wasn't falling on the city at all. It was falling across his memories. At 5 minutes before 7, the brass bell rang once again. By now, Noah no longer looked at the clock. He already knew exactly when the old man would arrive. Arthur took his usual seat. His coffee was served. The cinnamon biscuit was placed beside it, and the familiar silence settled over the cafe once again. This evening, however, something was different. After taking his first sip of coffee, Arthur looked up. "My boy." Noah blinked in surprise. It was the first time the old man had ever called him over. "Yes, sir?" Arthur turned his eyes toward the rain-streaked window. "The rain is beautiful tonight." Noah smiled politely. "It is, although I've never really liked rainy days." A faint smile appeared on Arthur's face. "When I was your age, neither did I." A brief silence settled between them. "And now?" Arthur kept watching the rain. "Now it reminds me that there's no one left waiting for me to hurry." Noah didn't fully understand what he meant. Yet something about those words filled him with an unexpected sense of peace. Arthur spoke again. "When we're young, we love sunny days because we always have somewhere to be." He paused, watching the rain slide slowly down the glass. "When we grow old, we begin to appreciate the rain. It asks everyone to slow down." Almost instinctively, Noah looked outside. Arthur was right. The people who had been rushing along the sidewalks only minutes earlier were now walking more carefully beneath their umbrellas. Cars moved more slowly through the wet streets. The entire city seemed to have surrendered to a gentler rhythm. "How long have you been working here?" Arthur asked. "About 3 months. And do you like it?" Noah shrugged. "I think so. But once I finish university, I'll probably find another job." Arthur carefully placed his coffee cup back onto its saucer. "When we're young, we spend most of our lives believing we're meant to be somewhere else." His voice remained calm, almost thoughtful. "But sometimes, the longest journey we'll ever take happens in the very place we never leave." Noah fell silent once again. Every sentence Arthur spoke carried the quiet weight of a lifetime. The cafe door opened. A young couple stepped inside, laughing as they escaped the rain. The young man pulled a crumpled napkin from his jacket pocket and gently wiped the raindrops from the woman's hair. She smiled at him, and together they laughed as though the rest of the world had disappeared. Noah welcomed them and led them to a table by the window. After taking their order, he found himself glancing toward Arthur. The old man was watching them. There was no envy in his eyes, no sadness either. Only the quiet smile of someone remembering a beautiful moment from a lifetime ago. After a few minutes, Arthur reached into his coat pocket and removed his old leather wallet. He quietly took out a few bills and motioned for Noah to come over. "I'd like to pay for the young couple's dinner." Noah looked at him in surprise. "Do you know them, sir?" Arthur gently shook his head. "No." "Then why?" Arthur kept his eyes on the rain beyond the window. "Because every once in a while, it's good to give a small gift to the people we used to be." For a moment, Noah couldn't find the right words. He simply nodded and quietly added the amount to Arthur's bill. When the young couple finished their meal and asked for the check, Noah smiled. "It's already been taken care of." The two of them looked at each other in confusion. By who? Noah hesitated for a brief moment. Then he glanced toward Arthur's table. It was empty. Arthur had already left. Noah hurried to the front door. Outside, the rain had grown heavier. The sidewalks shimmered beneath the streetlights as Arthur slowly walked away, his familiar silhouette disappearing into the quiet evening. Just before reaching the corner, he stopped. He looked across the street. There was no one there. Even so, a gentle smile appeared on his face. In a voice so soft it was almost carried away by the rain, he whispered, "Same time tomorrow." Then he continued walking until he disappeared around the corner. Noah remained standing in the doorway, watching the empty street. He knew Arthur hadn't been speaking to him, but if not to him, who had he been talking to? That night, for the very first time, Noah found himself wondering where Arthur went after leaving the cafe. He had watched him arrive every evening for 3 months, but he had never seen where he went afterward. No one had. The following evening, Noah decided he was finally going to find out. A few minutes after Arthur stepped out of the cafe, the rain began to ease. Puddles scattered beneath the streetlights reflected pools of warm golden light, turning the sidewalks into shimmering mirrors. Inside, Noah untied his apron. "I'm heading out," he called to Daniel. Daniel glanced at the clock. "Leaving early tonight?" Noah nodded. "I thought I'd take a walk." Daniel smiled. He didn't ask another question. It almost seemed as though he already knew the real reason. When Noah stepped outside, Arthur was already nearing the end of the street. He wasn't walking quickly, nor was he walking slowly. His pace carried the effortless rhythm of someone who had followed the same route for countless years. Keeping a respectful distance, Noah quietly followed. The city was settling into the night. The bakery had already switched off its lights. The florist was pulling down its shutters. A handful of passengers waited silently beside the last bus stop of the evening. Arthur never stopped to look into a single shop window. He never hesitated. He walked with the certainty of a man who knew every step by heart. After nearly 10 minutes, they entered one of the city's older neighborhoods. The buildings grew smaller. Ancient sycamore trees lined the narrow sidewalks, their rain-soaked leaves drifting gently onto the cobblestones whenever the wind stirred. Arthur finally stopped in front of an old 2-story apartment building. He took a key from his pocket, unlocked the front door, and disappeared inside. The hallway light flickered on for a few seconds before fading into darkness once again. Noah remained beneath a nearby tree, watching from across the street. A few moments later, a single light appeared behind one of the second-floor windows. No other apartment lit up. The entire building seemed empty, except for that one quiet room. Half an hour passed. Noah was just beginning to think about leaving when a figure moved behind the curtain. Arthur appeared carrying a small watering can. He carefully watered the flower pots resting on the windowsill. Then he closed the curtains. Without realizing it, Noah smiled. How ordinary. Perhaps there wasn't a mystery after all. Perhaps people simply imagined stories whenever they couldn't explain someone else's loneliness. He was about to turn away when the apartment door opened again. Arthur stepped outside. This time, however, his leather briefcase was nowhere to be seen. Instead, he was carrying a small bouquet of white lilies. Noah frowned. It was nearly 10 o'clock. Who buys flowers at that hour? Arthur continued walking with the same calm, measured pace. Once again, Noah followed from a distance. 5 minutes later, Arthur stopped before the wrought iron gates of the old city cemetery. Noah froze. Arthur quietly walked inside. The cemetery was wrapped in silence. The rain had stopped completely. Moonlight shimmered across the rain-darkened headstones. Keeping several yards behind, Noah followed him along the narrow stone paths. Arthur never paused to search for the way. He knew exactly where he was going. At last, he stopped before a modest grave. Slowly, he knelt. He placed the white lilies into the small vase with great care. Then, with gentle movements, he brushed away the damp leaves scattered across the stone. For a long time, he simply remained there. Noah tried to read the name engraved on the headstone, but the branches of an old tree hid most of the inscription. Only one word was visible: Lena. The rest remained hidden. Arthur reached into his coat and removed the little black notebook. He opened it, uncapped his pen, and once again, he wrote only a single sentence. Then he closed the notebook and slipped it back inside his coat. Slowly, he rose to his feet. His fingertips rested lightly against the cold stone. For the first time since Noah had known him, he heard Arthur speak to someone who wasn't there. "We're almost there." Nothing more. Arthur turned and quietly walked away, disappearing into the night. Noah remained where he was. "We're almost there." The words echoed through his mind. Almost where? Who was he talking to? Who was we? Once again, the questions remained unanswered. But this time, Noah felt something he hadn't felt before. Arthur wasn't simply mourning someone he had lost. He was waiting for something, and whatever it was, he believed it was drawing closer with every passing day. Noah arrived at the cafe earlier than usual the next morning. As always, Daniel was behind the counter, preparing his morning coffee. Before Noah had even taken off his coat, the question escaped his lips. Was she his wife? Daniel stopped. He slowly set the coffee cup down on the counter. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he looked up. No. A puzzled expression crossed Noah's face. Daniel drew a slow breath before quietly adding, "And that's the saddest part of the whole story." The cafe was unusually peaceful that morning. The familiar aroma of freshly ground coffee filled the room as Daniel prepared the day's first batch of beans, just as he had done every morning for decades. Noah, however, had barely slept. His thoughts had remained in the cemetery. And with Daniel's words, "That's the saddest part of the whole story." The sentence had echoed through his mind all night. While Daniel straightened the small sign hanging in the front window, Noah quietly walked over. "Did you really know him?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He placed a few porcelain cups onto the shelf before lowering himself into one of the old wooden chairs. For a long moment, he simply stared out the window. Finally, he spoke. "We often think we know people." His eyes remained fixed on the street outside. "But as the years pass, we realize we've only known the part they chose to show us." Noah listened in silence. "I knew him when he was young. I remember the first day he walked through that door. And I remember his last visit too." Noah frowned. "His last visit?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Everyone has a last visit. We just never know which one it will be." Business remained slow throughout the day. By afternoon, the rain had returned. As droplets slowly traced their way down the windows, Noah began wiping the tables. When he reached Arthur's table, his fingers caught on something beneath the edge. He bent down. Someone had carved tiny initials into the underside of the tabletop many years earlier. Brushing away the dust with his fingertips, he leaned closer. The letters were barely visible. L and A. Beneath them was a date. October 12th, 1987. Noah felt his breath catch. It was the very same year engraved on the metal box in the storage room. The same year as the faded photograph. Suddenly, he realized this wasn't just a table. That evening, Arthur returned as he always did, at the same time, to the same seat. As Noah placed the coffee before him, his eyes instinctively drifted beneath the table. Arthur noticed. A faint smile crossed his face. "So, you found it?" Noah looked up, surprised. "Sir?" "The carving beneath the table." For the first time, Noah couldn't bring himself to lie. "Yes," Arthur nodded gently. "When we're young, we believe we'll live forever. We carve our names into wood. We write dates. We make promises." He paused before taking another sip of coffee. But time is far more patient than wood. Noah searched for the right words. None came. After a long silence, he finally gathered enough courage to ask, "Who was L?" Arthur didn't answer immediately. He turned toward the rain-streaked window. For several quiet moments, he watched the droplets slide slowly down the glass. Then, in little more than a whisper, he said, "Lena." It was the first time Noah had heard her name spoken aloud. "Lena," Arthur smiled. "It was the most beautiful name I ever heard." Noah was about to ask another question when Arthur gently shook his head. "That's enough for today." There was no sadness in his voice. Only the quiet certainty of someone closing a door that had remained shut for many years. As the evening drew on and the cafe gradually emptied, Arthur once again removed the little black notebook from his coat. Noah watched from across the room. This time, after writing his single sentence, Arthur didn't close the notebook right away. Instead, he rested his fingertips lightly on the page for several seconds, almost as though he were trying to feel the words rather than read them. Only then did he close it. He stood, paid his bill, and walked toward the door. Just before stepping outside, he stopped. Without turning around, he spoke. "My boy." Noah stepped closer. "Yes, sir?" Arthur remained facing the rain outside. "Do you know what people spend most of their lives waiting for?" Noah thought for a moment. "Happiness?" Arthur slowly shook his head. "No. Forgiveness." The brass bell chimed softly as the door closed behind him. Arthur disappeared into the night. Noah stood staring at the entrance long after he was gone. Almost without realizing it, he whispered to himself, who could he never forgive? That night, Noah didn't follow Arthur. For the first time, curiosity had given way to respect. He was beginning to understand that there is a delicate line between following someone's footsteps and honoring their silence. As Arthur disappeared around the corner, Noah remained standing in the doorway. The city looked exactly as it always had. The rain still fell gently. The streets were unchanged, and yet, somehow, the city felt as though it had begun telling him an entirely different story. The next morning, when Daniel unlocked the cafe, Arthur was already standing outside. It was the first time he had ever arrived before opening hours. Daniel looked at him in surprise. "Everything all right?" Arthur held out a small envelope. "I'd like you to keep this for me." Daniel accepted it without hesitation. Across the front, in Arthur's careful handwriting, was a single sentence, "Not yet." There was no name, no address, no date, nothing else. Daniel didn't open it. After all these years, some things simply weren't meant to be questioned. Arthur gave a quiet nod and walked away without another word, long before his usual hour. Noah had watched the exchange from inside the cafe. "What did he give you?" he asked. Daniel slipped the envelope into his pocket. "You'll know when it's time." That evening, Arthur arrived at precisely the same time as always. It was as though nothing unusual had happened that morning. He sat at his table. His coffee arrived. The familiar silence settled over the room. A few minutes later, Arthur opened the little black notebook. As he did, an old envelope slipped from between its pages and drifted onto the floor. Its yellowed edges were worn from years of being carried. Arthur bent down to pick it up. Noah was closer. "I've got it." He reached down and lifted it before Arthur could. As he handed it back, his eyes accidentally caught the handwriting on the front. "For Lena." He immediately looked away. "I'm sorry." Arthur accepted the envelope. For several quiet moments, he simply looked at it. Then, unexpectedly, he held it back out toward Noah. It was never mailed. Noah blinked. "May I read it?" Arthur thought for a few seconds. Then he smiled. "No, but I wanted you to know it exists." Noah couldn't help smiling. It was the first time he had seen Arthur make a joke. After another quiet moment, Arthur spoke almost to himself. "When we're young, we believe we'll send certain letters tomorrow." His fingers gently traced the edge of the envelope. "Eventually, we run out of tomorrows. Silence returned to the cafe. Noah didn't try to answer. Some sentences carried too much weight for words to improve them. Arthur carefully slipped the letter back inside the notebook. As he closed it, his hand trembled ever so slightly. Perhaps it was age. Or perhaps memory had become heavier than time itself. Just before closing, a young woman stepped into the cafe. She looked like a university student. "My phone died," she said with an apologetic smile. "Would it be all right if I charged it for a little while?" "Of course," Daniel replied. She thanked him and took a seat by the window. Arthur watched her quietly for a few moments. Then he pulled a small folded note from his pocket and handed it to Noah. "Please give this to her." Noah unfolded it. It contained only one sentence. "Put your phone away for a little while. Some memories are meant to be captured only by your eyes." Noah carried the note to the young woman. She looked surprised at first, then she smiled. Without another word, she turned off her phone and set it aside. For nearly 10 minutes, she simply sat there watching the rain, doing nothing, just looking. When she finally left, she smiled warmly at Arthur from across the room. "Thank you." Arthur answered with nothing more than a gentle nod. Noah returned to the table. "Do you often write notes for strangers?" Arthur smiled. "No, I used to write them for only one person." The old clock struck 9. Arthur stood, buttoned his overcoat, picked up his hat, and walked toward the door. Just before leaving, he stopped. This time, he turned and looked directly at Noah. "My boy." "Yes, sir?" "Have you ever waited for someone?" Noah thought for a moment, then slowly shook his head. "No." Arthur smiled with quiet sadness. "I hope you never have to." The brass bell chimed softly as he disappeared into the night. For a long time, Noah stared at the empty table. For the first time, he realized Arthur had never truly been alone. Some people live surrounded not by companions, but by memories, and sometimes memories occupy far more space than people ever could. The following evening, Arthur arrived once again at his usual hour. This time, instead of greeting him at the entrance, Noah was already waiting beside the window. He no longer wanted merely to watch Arthur arrive. He wanted to understand him. The little brass bell chimed. Arthur stepped inside. He gently shook the rain from his overcoat, removed his hat, and walked to his usual seat. As Noah prepared the coffee, he asked quietly, "May I ask you something today?" Arthur smiled. "Have you really managed to save a question until now?" They both laughed softly. Noah placed the coffee on the table but remained standing. 1987. What happened that year? Arthur's hand rested on the handle of his cup. He didn't answer immediately. By now, Noah had learned to understand Arthur's silences. They weren't refusals. They were memories. "Why that year?" Arthur asked. Noah thought about the initials carved beneath the table. the old photograph, the metal box, the initials, L and A, the same date. Arthur nodded slowly. For the first time, he began speaking before taking a sip of his coffee. I was 29. This city felt impossibly large. I had no money. But I had time. He smiled faintly. Lena had exactly the opposite. She had money, but no time. We met for the first time in this cafe. It wasn't nearly as quiet back then. The tables were smaller. Old jazz played on the radio every evening. Lena hated coffee, he smiled to himself, and yet she came here with me every single night. Why? Noah asked without thinking. Arthur looked down at his cup. Because I loved it, he smiled gently. There are only a few moments in life when you truly know someone loves you. Lena loved me enough to sit through something she never enjoyed. I didn't understand what that meant until many years later. Arthur reached into his coat and pulled out another photograph. This time, he handed it to Noah. The young man, the young woman, the same table, the same window, the same coffee cups. On the back, one sentence remained perfectly legible. October 12th, 1987. If we ever lose each other, we'll meet here again. Noah stared at the words for a long time. Did you really say that to each other? Arthur looked toward the rain outside. No. Who did? Lena. Noah smiled. That's incredibly romantic. Arthur chuckled softly. No. She was stubborn. I had been offered a job in another city. She didn't want to leave. We argued for days. Finally, she looked at me and said, Arthur closed his eyes. It was as though he could still hear her voice. If we ever lose each other, I'll wait for you here. Silence settled over the cafe. For the first time, Noah saw Arthur's eyes fill with tears. He wasn't crying. He was simply carrying the weight of a memory that had never grown lighter. What happened after that? Arthur didn't answer immediately. He finally took his first sip of coffee, carefully set the cup back onto its saucer, then said quietly, Sometimes we're living through the day that changes our lives without realizing it. At that exact moment, the brass bell above the door chimed. A middle-aged woman stepped inside. Arthur froze. Noah had never seen him react that way before. The color drained from his face. The woman looked astonishingly like Lena. The same dark hair, the same graceful walk, the same gentle smile. She chose another table. Arthur couldn't take his eyes off her. For the first time, Noah noticed his hands trembling. A few minutes later, the woman finished her coffee and quietly left. They never exchanged a single word. The door closed. Arthur released a slow breath, then whispered, "There are faces that a lifetime is never long enough to forget." That sentence stayed with Noah long after the cafe had emptied. And for the first time in his own life, he wondered whether he had already lived through a day that would one day change everything. The following evening, the city was unusually quiet. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a cool breeze that drifted gently through the streets. The cafe windows were clear for the first time in days, allowing the people outside to be seen without the soft blur of rain or fog. At exactly 5 minutes before 7, the little brass bell above the door chimed. By now, Noah was expecting it. Arthur stepped inside. But something was different. For the first time since Noah had known him, the little black notebook was nowhere to be seen. His leather briefcase was still by his side. His hat still rested neatly across his knees. His overcoat was buttoned as always, but the notebook, it was gone. The coffee arrived. The cinnamon biscuit followed. Silence settled over the table once again. Nearly 10 minutes passed without a word. Then Arthur reached into his coat and placed a small brass key on the table. It was old, worn smooth by time, engraved with only one number, 17. Noah looked down at it. "What's it for?" Arthur smiled. "A drawer." "Where?" "In my apartment." Noah frowned. "Why are you showing it to me?" Arthur took a slow sip of his coffee. He remained silent for a long time before answering in the calmest voice Noah had ever heard. "Because there are some doors a person cannot close alone." Noah didn't speak. Arthur slipped the key back into his pocket. Then, for the first time, he looked directly into Noah's eyes. If one day I don't come here, Noah felt an unexpected chill. Arthur finished the sentence. "I want you to open that drawer." The silence that followed was so complete that even the ticking of the old clock sounded louder than usual. Noah forced a smile. "I'm sure you'll be coming here for many more years." Arthur smiled too. But this time, there was a quiet weariness behind it. "No one is ever promised that, my boy." At that exact moment, the brass bell rang once more. An elderly man, dressed in a dark suit, stepped inside. Without looking around the cafe, he walked straight to Arthur's table. The two men looked at each other for a long moment. Then the stranger spoke. "It's been 37 years." Arthur slowly nodded. "I know." The man reached into his coat and placed a small white envelope on the table. "It's time. You deserve to know." Arthur picked up the envelope. He didn't open it. He simply stared at it for a long time. Then the stranger stood. Without another word, he walked out of the cafe. Noah hadn't realized he was holding his breath until the door closed. For the first time since Noah had met him, Arthur left his coffee unfinished. Without opening the envelope, he slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat. For a long while, he remained perfectly still. Noah had never seen him look so distant. The coffee had grown cold. For years, Arthur had never left a single drop behind. Outside, the wind began to rise again. A small wind chime hanging near the window swayed gently, its delicate notes blending with the steady ticking of the old wall clock. Noah wanted to walk over. He didn't. By now, he understood that some silences deserved to remain untouched. Nearly 10 minutes passed. Finally, Arthur lifted his hand. "My boy." Noah approached. "Yes, sir?" Arthur removed the white envelope from his pocket and slowly turned it between his fingers. "There are envelopes that remain unopened for years." Noah listened quietly. "We're not afraid to open them. We're afraid of what they'll make impossible to change." "For the first time," Noah answered. "What do you mean?" Arthur gave a faint smile. "Because once you've read them, you can never go back to the life you imagined." Another long silence passed. Then Arthur did something Noah never expected. He held the envelope out to him. "Open it." Noah stared in disbelief. "You want me to?" "Yes." "Are you sure?" Arthur nodded. "If I read it, the man I used to be will hear those words again." He looked gently at Noah. "If you read it, the man I am today can simply listen." With trembling hands, Noah accepted the envelope. The paper had become so fragile with age that the seal almost came apart on its own. Inside was a single typed letter. He began reading. "Dear Mr. Arthur Hale." Noah paused. "Hale? That's your name?" Arthur nodded quietly. For the first time, Noah knew the old man's full name. Arthur Hale. He continued reading. "We are pleased to inform you that your application, dated November 12, 1987, has been approved." Arthur slowly closed his eyes. Noah read on. "Your appointment as an architect at our London office has been confirmed. You are expected to begin your position no later than November 20th. Failure to report by that date will result in the offer being withdrawn." The final line, "We wish you every success in your new life." That was all. Noah lowered the letter. "You never went?" Arthur smiled softly. "I did." Silence filled the cafe once again. Noah couldn't understand. "Did Lena go with you?" Arthur turned toward the window. Outside, people passed beneath the streetlights. After a long pause, he answered with a single word. "No." A knot tightened in Noah's throat. "Then why do you keep waiting?" Arthur didn't answer immediately. An elderly couple slowly walked past the cafe. The woman held tightly onto the man's arm as they disappeared into the evening together. Arthur watched them with a gentle smile. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "Sometimes we don't board the wrong train. We simply board the right one, at the wrong time." Noah didn't fully understand the sentence, but somehow he understood the feeling. There was no bitterness in Arthur's voice, only the quiet peace of someone who had stopped arguing with the past. That night, Arthur stood earlier than usual. His coffee remained unfinished. He hadn't touched the cinnamon biscuit. As he reached the door, he turned back toward Noah. "Tomorrow, I'll bring you something." Noah smiled. "What is it?" Arthur smiled in return. "Something I haven't shown another soul in 37 years." The brass bell rang softly. Arthur disappeared into the night once again. Walking home that evening, Noah realized something had changed. For the first time, he no longer felt sorry for Arthur, because he finally understood that Arthur wasn't defined by his loneliness. He was defined by the extraordinary way he had loved. Some people don't wait because they're alone. Some people choose to wait because love never really taught them how to leave. The next evening, everything was ready by 5 minutes before 7. As always, Noah prepared Arthur's coffee with quiet care. The small white cup of black coffee, a slender glass of water, a cinnamon biscuit resting neatly on its little porcelain plate. Everything was exactly as it had been every evening before. He glanced toward the brass bell above the cafe door. In another moment, it would ring. 5 minutes before 7 became 4. Then 3, 2, 1. The door never opened. Noah looked toward the window. Maybe the rain had delayed him, he thought. For the first time, 7 o'clock came and went. Arthur never arrived. Daniel said nothing. He quietly continued balancing the register, as though both of them were thinking the very same thing, but neither was willing to give it a voice. By 8 o'clock, the coffee had gone cold. The biscuit still rested untouched on its plate. The chair across the table remained empty, but tonight, both chairs were empty. The next evening came. Arthur didn't arrive. Neither did he the evening after that. A week passed. Every night, Noah prepared the same cup of coffee. Every night, Daniel watched without saying a word. Not once did he say, "You can stop now." On the 8th evening, the brass bell finally rang. Noah lifted his head at once, but it wasn't Arthur. It was the elderly man in the dark suit. The same man who had delivered the white envelope. He walked quietly to Arthur's table and sat down. Looking at Noah, he asked, "He never came back, did he?" Noah lowered his eyes. No. The man reached into his coat pocket and placed a small brass key on the table. The number engraved on it was unmistakable. 17. "The key to his apartment," he said quietly. "He wanted you to have it." Noah felt his throat tighten. Did he pass away? The man remained silent for a long moment. Then he slowly nodded. 3 nights ago. The old clock continued ticking on the wall. Neither of them spoke again. The following morning, Noah stood outside Arthur's apartment building. He unlocked the front door and climbed the familiar staircase to the 2nd floor. The apartment was smaller than he had imagined. Spotlessly clean, peacefully quiet. Books filled every shelf. Nothing was out of place. It looked as though Arthur had simply stepped outside and would return at any moment. Noah walked slowly into the bedroom. The room was just as carefully arranged. Books stood neatly in order. A few violets still bloomed on the windowsill. Arthur's reading glasses rested atop an open book on the desk. Beside the bed stood an old walnut nightstand. Mounted to its top drawer was a small brass plaque. 17. Noah removed the key from his pocket. It fit perfectly. He slowly opened the drawer. Inside were only 3 things: the little black leather notebook, a yellowed newspaper clipping, and a faded photograph of Arthur and Lena in their younger years. He picked up the photograph. Both of them were smiling. They were sitting at the same table by the cafe window. Arthur held a coffee cup in one hand. Lena, despite never liking coffee, held her cup with both hands, taking tiny sips simply because it meant she could stay with him a little longer. Noah carefully returned the photograph to the drawer. Then he opened the notebook. At the top of the very first page was a single sentence. "If you're reading this, then I suppose I finally missed my evening at the cafe." He slowly turned the pages. For years, every page contained only a single sentence. "I came again today. It rained. Our table was empty. At 5 minutes before 7, I looked toward the door again." As the years passed, the entries became longer. Arthur's handwriting grew weaker. The spaces between each line widened. Eventually, Noah reached a page dated October 12, 1987. This time, Arthur had written far more than a single sentence. Noah began reading. "For 37 years, people believed I was an old man waiting for the woman I loved. None of them knew the truth. I wasn't waiting for you, because I already knew you would never come. I was only trying to relive the evening I never showed up. Every day I sat in the same chair, hoping time might take pity on me, hoping that one day the cafe door would open, and this time I would be the one who arrived. We all know the past cannot be changed, but guilt never accepts what the mind already understands." Noah turned the page. Arthur continued. "That day, I answered the call from London. I chose the career that promised me everything. I didn't choose you. You chose to wait for me. For hours. I never came. 3 years later, while reading through old newspapers, I found a small article. A young woman had been killed while walking home on a rainy evening. There was a tiny photograph beside the story. The moment I saw it, my world stopped. It was you. That was the day I realized sometimes we're not late for a meeting. We're late for our entire lives." Tears quietly rolled down Noah's face. He turned to the final page. Arthur's handwriting had become so fragile that some words were almost impossible to read. "People often wondered why I always ordered only 1 cup of coffee. I never answered, because I never found the courage to place a second cup on the table. I could look at an empty chair, but I couldn't bear the sight of an untouched cup. That would have meant accepting the truth. Only a few final lines remained. If you're reading this, I have one last favor to ask. Tomorrow, at 5 minutes before 7, go to our table. Order 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for Lena. Perhaps you'll finish the goodbye I never had the strength to say. The notebook ended there. Noah remained seated for a very long time. The silence filling the room still carried the weight Arthur had lived with for 37 years. The following evening, at 5 minutes before 7, Noah walked into the cafe. Daniel looked at him. He didn't ask a single question. Noah simply nodded toward the familiar table by the window. "May I sit there tonight?" Daniel quietly nodded. Once Noah had taken his seat, he looked up and said, "I'd like 2 coffees today." Daniel hesitated, but he said nothing. A few minutes later, he returned carrying 2 steaming cups. Noah pulled one toward himself. The other he gently placed before the chair that had remained empty for so many years. The cafe fell silent. Then, the little brass bell above the door chimed. A young couple stepped inside, laughing as they hurried out of the rain. Daniel instinctively started walking toward another table. Then he stopped. He looked at Noah. Noah smiled. "Seat them here." Daniel hesitated. "But this table has spent long enough remembering how to wait." Noah smiled softly. "Let it remember how to live again." Daniel quietly removed the 2 untouched cups. The young couple took their seats by the window. Within moments, their laughter filled the little corner of the cafe that had once belonged to Arthur and Lena. Noah slowly stood. He walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back one final time. Arthur and Lena were no longer there, but somehow, their story had quietly made room for another one to begin. Noah opened the door. The brass bell rang one last gentle note. Outside, a light rain had begun to fall. This time, no one was running late. Arthur's story has come to an end, but perhaps it leaves us with one quiet reminder. Never wait too long to live, and never be too late for the people you love. The night keeps its most beautiful stories. Now close your eyes and let your dreams tell the rest. Good night.